Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and in today's video we are going to continue with the Primarch Project deep dive by going into the project number 4, who would be designated Perturabo. For this project's list of correspondences, its designated name would be Perturabo. The aspect of humanity that I think it embodies is genius. The Legion specialization is siege warfare or siegecraft, and the organ that I most associate with the 4th Primarch and the 4th Legion is the Catalepsean node. Primarch Project number 4's pod would land on the mountainous civilized world of Olympia. Though its early life was mostly unknown, it was rumored that it moved from settlement to settlement, offering its services as a sword for hire and as a craftsman, before one of the tyrants of Olympia requested that the rumors of him be confirmed. This tyrant was the tyrant of the city-state of Lakos, whose name was Demikos. When the project was found, he was found scaling the side of a mountain. The guards who found him recalled that the project would ask them if they saw what he saw in the sky. They did not and they could not, because the thing that project number 4 was referring to in the sky was a galactic tear in space that would later be known as the Eye of Terror, which he had the ability to see at all times. Project number 4 would be taken in by the tyrant, and agreement struck between the two, one of fealty, loyalty, and service on the project's end, and one of patronage and protection on the tyrant's end. This bargain was agreed upon, and the project became part of the city-state of Lakos. The project would actually be nameless for some time before he chose his own name while reading ancient texts in the libraries of Lakos. He chose the name Perturabo. Being a word from an unknown language, no one on the world knew what it meant, but we have more information on this unknown word than those of Olympia did. The origins of the name Perturabo are possibly in the word perturbed, which means to be anxious, bothered, agitated, and troubled in mind. And if perturbed is the source of his name, then it is a curious description indeed. It sounds very similar to disturbed, but the difference between disturbed and perturbed is that disturbed implies interference with one's mental processes caused by worry and interruption. Perturbed, on the other hand, implies a deep disturbance of mind and emotions. One is caused by interference, the other is the interference. It would seem that Perturabo believed that something was wrong with him and his mind, and going into his lore, it's easy to see why. The aspect of humanity that Project number 4 would embody is, in my opinion, genius. Genius is defined as the possession of exceptional intellectual or creative power. Genius is a strong foundation of human nature, as it led to innovation and advancement of our species and our condition. Primarch Project number 4 was extremely intelligent and creative. It is said that he could understand the inner workings of objects and machines just by looking at them. He devoured knowledge and information on a variety of subjects. His ability to create new things was unmatched on Olympia. However, being that the state of Olympia was that of war, Project number 4's natural creativity and ingenuity would be applied most to war, and specifically to the aspect of war that dominated Olympia, which was siege warfare. The human population on Olympia were separated into nation-states, isolated from each other by the mountainous terrain of the planet, and huddled into stone fortresses. These nation-states were constantly at war with each other. Warfare involving reinforced stone fortifications took the form of siege warfare, and due to Perturabo's creativity and intelligence, as well as naturally understanding the construction behind and underneath things, he was able to master that kind of war better than any of the tyrants on Olympia, both in attack and defense. The Legion specialization of the 4th Legion is siegecraft. However, a lot was at play in how the Legion developed this focus. The initial recruits to the 4th Legion on Terra were said to come specifically from the gun tribes and tech enclaves of Sek Amrak. The Geneseed of the 4th Primarch Project was highly adaptable and had significantly lower rejection rates than those of other legions. This and the fact that they had a physically lower resistance to bionics made them one of the fastest growing legions at the time, and one of the earliest to be deployed besides the 1st and the 5th legions. Though the 4th Legion's Geneseed was physically adaptable, the legion and their tactics remained largely unchanged from the tenets and style they began with on Terra. Their style of war was siege, and they were stubborn, relentless, and indifferent to their own casualties in this regard. It is said that once they enacted a siege, they could not be called off except for by the highest possible authority in a given conflict. It's for this reason that even though their tactics were static and unchanged, they would still achieve victory after victory. They were relentless, unmerciful, and brutal, a legion to which overwhelming firepower and high casualty meant nothing so long as victory was accomplished. The tragic thing is that if the nature of their Primarch's Geneseed is any indication of their potential, then it would seem that the Legion could have been experts at any other style of war had they been allowed to learn and practice. The reason why they became experts in siege warfare on Terra and during the early Great Crusade, before being reunited with their Primarch, was because they demonstrated skill at it during their initial conflicts. That and their initial conflicts required proficiency in that style of war. They were so good at it that they would be sent to other conflicts that required the style of war that they had mastered. They fought siege after grueling siege with little time for rest in between. For this reason, they became known as the Workhorse Legion, because they were almost always moving and fighting. Siege warfare had an effect on the psyche of the Legion as well overall, because the style of war was one of numbers, calculations, attrition, bombardment, the measurement of distances and the pinpoint of weak points, long-ranged firefights, and the constant explosion of artillery before a breach in defenses was made and it was time to storm the fortress and engage in unmerciful close combat. To put it briefly, people stop becoming people in this environment. Instead, they become numbers, statistics, units, designations, all which the nature of the Primarch Project whose Geneseed they were made from easily processed. Everything is broken down to their parts and the usefulness and effectiveness of those parts. The 4th Legion knew this because that is how things would have to be if they were to be successful. While siege did require the inbuilt genius that came with their Geneseed, it did not require the creativity that came with it as well. All that it required was consistent calculation and brutal application of overwhelming force. In fact, it was their genius which enabled them to understand and embrace this logically, but emotionally it made them bitter. In a siege, they found themselves hoping that the enemy wouldn't surrender so that they could release their pent-up rage on the enemy when the siege reached its climax. This actually led to the 4th Legion being extremely formidable in close combat, comparable to those Astartes of the Warhounds or World Eaters Legion. The longer a siege took, the more restless rage was pent up. This could be said to be a reflection of both the Legion in an individual conflict and the Legion in the conflicts they would fight overall. It's not hard to understand how the 4th Legion and also the 4th Primarch Project became so temperamentally bitter. If you combine being utilized during a time or on a world in which the constant drawn-out application of siege warfare was standard practice, with being limited to only that instead of expression of one's inner creativity and adaptability, and having no time for rest or repose, it is understandable how human emotions can be seen as insignificant in the larger picture of things. If not for the suppression of that creative side of their genius, the 4th Legion would have been closer in nature to the 10th Legion, which would be known as the Iron Hands. Where most other legions were able to express their mastery of various styles of war, it would seem as if the 4th Legion were constantly denied this by the demands of the Great Crusade, which only saw their expertise in one arena. So like an eternal siege, their anger and bitterness only grew with time, hidden beneath their blunt effectiveness. The 4th Legion actually were given a name before being reunited with their Primarch. Similar to the 1st Legion, who were called the Angels of Death by those human forces which fought besides them during the Wars of Unification, the 4th Legion would also be given a name by the humans which fought besides them. However, this name was seen as offensive and derogatory, never spoken in the presence of Astartes of the Legion. They were called the Corpse Grinders. They were called this because those mortal forces who fought besides the 4th Legion knew that death was promised. The casualty amongst the human forces that fought besides the 4th were horrendous, and they were wielded with as much indifference as the Astartes of the Legions were themselves by their commanders. Mortal commanders assigned to fight alongside the 4th frequently refused to do so, choosing to suffer the punishment of disobedience rather than fight besides the Corpse Grinders. The 4th Legion would accomplish many victories before being reunited with their Primarch, fighting on Terra and throughout the Sol system, most notably on Venus, where they were commanded by the Emperor himself against the War Witches on Venus, even being commanded by Horus Lupercal in some campaigns. Their victories gave them access to new weapons provided by Mars and had them develop a symbiotic relationship with the Martian cult. Their tactics were basic and predictable, and this would be remarked even by the other Primarchs, but the Legion's tactics were also extremely effective, and that was something that was also undeniable. The original color scheme for the 4th Legion on Terra was a dark metal color with a dull gold trim, very basic and unappealing, lacking the flair and color of the other legions, but also not needing those things either. The Legion's focus and specialization was siege warfare, and it seemed to be consistently one of circumstances, but the Emperor may have had a large influence in it as well. As his legion was developing itself in the battles of the Great Crusade, the Primarch of the 4th Legion developed in a similar way on the world of Olympia, spearheading many battles of siege on Olympia and winning accolade after accolade for the tyrants of Lakos. Just like how the Legion made from his Geneseed would develop into cold and bitter warriors, Perturabo developed in a similar way. It is said that Perturabo was always guarded and reserved because he understood how everything around him worked, even the interaction between humans, and because of this he had no warmth for those around him because he knew their relationship was only an exchange. He had no love for the tyrant of Lakos who took him in and tried to treat him as an actual son because Perturabo understood that the tyrant was using him for power. Perturabo was keenly aware of how different he was from those around him. That being said, according to an account of the situation, when the Emperor located Project Number 4 and met with him on Olympia, the previously brooding and reserved Primarch is said to have shouted with joy and displayed more positive emotion in that moment than anyone on the planet would have ever seen at one time. In this account, it is said that the Emperor knew his name to be Perturabo before the Primarch had said it. The Emperor expressed pride in Perturabo's accomplishments on Olympia and asked for his fealty, to which he fervently agreed. He also called Perturabo his Lord of Iron. Now, if this account is true, it points out a few things about both the Emperor and Perturabo. First, it, in a way, is another confirmation that the Emperor did indeed pattern the legions of Astartes after the Legion of Thunder Warriors. I say this because, as we went over in the Primarch Deep Dive, there were 20 Thunder Warrior legions, just like there were 20 Astartes legions, and there seem to be correspondences between the focus of both. One of the only examples of this that we have been given is of the Thunder Warrior Primarch Ushoten. Ushoten was the Primarch of the 4th Legion of Thunder Warriors. The 4th Legion of Thunder Warriors was called the Iron Lords, and they're specialized in siege warfare. Perturabo was the Primarch of the 4th Legion of Astartes. The 4th Legion of Astartes would eventually be named the Iron Warriors, and they would specialize in siege warfare. But in this account of the Primarch meeting the Emperor called Perturabo the Lord of Iron before he was ever reunited with his legion, and before Perturabo would ever name his legion the Iron Warriors. So it seems like the Emperor had an idea in mind for what he wanted the legion to be, and this would also explain why they were constantly deployed in siege warfare conflicts. This further confirms that the Emperor had a plan for all of the legions, and if we think back to the 1st and the 3rd Legion, it begs to question, why else would the Emperor allow the Angels of Death to use war crime level weaponry unless that was a part of his plan for the Legion? Why else would he allow the 3rd Legion such high status amongst the legions unless that fulfilled his vision for the Legion? Secondly, there was a reason that Perturabo was able to feel joy in the presence of the Emperor, and it was because the Emperor's presence blocked the effect that the Eye of Terror had on Perturabo. In the account in which Perturabo reacted with joy at meeting the Emperor, certain descriptions of the moments are used which indicate that Perturabo could no longer experience the weight on his mind that he previously did when he was in the presence of the Emperor. The Eye of Terror was the realm of chaos, and the Emperor was anathema to chaos, so in his presence, the effect of the warp was silent. When the 4th Primarch Project was reunited with his legion on the world of Olympia, one of the first things he did was look at the legion's list of wars and victory. He found it wanting and decided the way to rectify his legion was decimation. Decimation is a wild and ancient practice of war in which those of a battalion or a company had to all draw straws, and those who had drawn the short straws were to be killed by everyone else in the battalion or company. Perturabo had this done to his legion as a way of strengthening their resolve and commitment toward victory at any cost, and to let it be known what kind of Primarch he was. The other Primarchs were outraged by this and called Perturabo a madman, but the Emperor silenced them and accepted Perturabo's judgment of his legion without reprimanding him. It was as if the Emperor knew that this would happen and also saw the value in this. It is officially unknown why the Emperor didn't reprimand Perturabo, but if I were to speculate, I'd say that Perturabo was not reprimanded for his actions for two reasons. The first was because the legion was one of the fastest growing legions of all the legions because of their Geneseed, which was so adaptable and compatible with bionics. Yes, their casualties were high, but their numbers were easily replaced. Those decimated would soon be replaced and trained by the Primarch himself, which naturally meant that they would be trained at an even higher and stricter standard of effectiveness. The second reason is because this fulfilled the plans that the Emperor had for the Legion. Under the direction of their Primarch, the 4th Legion would be called the Iron Warriors. Their color scheme changed very little from their Terran style, with aspects of Olympia added onto the Legion's design, influenced by both the world itself and specifically the city-state of Lakos, where Perturabo grew to maturity. For example, the Decimator class Iron Mask helm design was likely Olympian in origin. Another aspect of the Legion's new design was the use of black and yellow chevrons in appearance of what looked like hazard markings. In modern lore, it is suggested that this was meant to be something of a joke about how dangerous the Legion was, comparing them to the hazard construction signs of old Terra. But I'd like to suggest that it wasn't a joke or a reference to the hazard construction markings on Terra, but instead were the heraldic colors of Lakos, the city-state that the Primarch Project grew in. If this is the case, it would seem that Perturabo himself adopted much of the culture of Olympia, having been shaped by it. The Legion adopting these colors would mark the Primarch's reunion and rule over his Legion, and the strict standard at which he would guide them. Another symbol that was incorporated into the armor design of the 4th Legion was a 4-pointed star. It is unknown what this star symbolized, but two theories that exist are that the 4-pointed star represented the Star of Olympia. Another theory is that the star represented the Eye of Terra, looking slightly similar to another star used in the 40th millennium during the Perturabo War, which also symbolized the same thing. The organization of the Legion also became influenced by the culture of Olympia as well. The Legion was organized into grand companies, which were similar to Astartes chapters of the 41st millennium, but with a larger stockpile of armor, weapons, and logistical support. Due to attrition, the numbers of each grand company changed frequently. The Iron Warriors began to develop warrior lodges and brotherhoods amongst their ranks during the Great Crusade, very similar to the structure of the hosts of the First Legion, and partially influenced by the principles of the Principia Bellicosa in their adoption of certain tactical markings. Such organizations included the Dodecatheon, which was known as the Brethren of Stone and was an order of accomplished masons and strategists of the Legion. There was the Apollocron, also known as the Brethren of Steel, whose focus was machinecraft and the creation of battle automata, and who were tied to the Mechanicus forces at the time. There was the Keladakos, also known as the Brethren of Cold, who actually formed after the Legion was reunited with their Primarch and focused on the maintenance of the Legion's fleet, and the Lysatra, also known as the Brethren of Thunder and the Burned Men, which actually composed of some of the Legion's most brutalized and unhinged guncrafters and weaponsmiths who were obsessed with the creation of destruction. There were also the Storbizashk, who were not really an order, but instead a unit within the Legion initially composed of siege lords of Lakos, who served under Perturabo in his campaigns on Olympia. And then there were the Tyranthagos, also known as the Dominators, who were Terminator armor-clad veteran Iron Warriors and Linebreakers, who also served as Perturabo's bodyguard until they were replaced by automata units of the same name. Perturabo and the Iron Warriors were consistently worn down by the demands of the Great Crusade, especially in their assigned campaign against the Harud Xenos species in a worthless system. Not only this, but they would go unthanked and unacknowledged for their sacrifice and competence. It would be no surprise that Perturabo and the Iron Warriors would betray the Emperor and side with the traitors in the Horus Heresy. The tragedy of Perturabo's betrayal was that it was initially done out of loyalty to the Imperium of Man. Perturabo discovered that his homeworld of Olympia had turned against the Imperium of Man after the planetary governor had died. Upon hearing this, Perturabo returned to his homeworld of Olympia and deployed his legions onto it, declaring decimation on the various city-states and slaughtering a large portion of the population. Realizing the magnitude of what he did, he would choose to side with Horus in the betrayal and himself turn against the Imperium, succumbing to his own nature and madness. It is said that Perturabo knew that the Emperor would not forgive him for the decimation of Olympia. Similar to how his legion was during the early years of the Great Crusade, Perturabo himself would be deployed by Horus, another Primarch Project, in grueling sieges, used as a specific tool and went largely unthanked by Horus as well. In something of an almost ironic similarity, Perturabo would be placed in charge of the siege of the Imperial Palace in the same way that Ushoten, Primarch of the 4th Legion of Thunder Warriors, spearheaded the palace coup during the Wars of Unification before the Great Crusade. Another similarity is that there would be a relationship between a Lord of Iron and a Golden Protector in both situations. With Ushoten, it would be a relatively positive relationship with Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Custodes Legion, a conflict that would end with Valdor killing the Primarch Ushoten. With Perturabo, it would be a relatively negative relationship with Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, an antagonism that still exists in the modern lore between the 4th Legion and the Imperial Fist chapter. I made a slight comparison earlier in the video between the 4th Legion, who would be known as the Iron Warriors, and the 10th Legion, who would be known as the Iron Hands, saying that if they had been allowed to focus more on their creative genius, the Iron Warriors would have been more like the Iron iron hands. With this comparison in mind, it would be a cruel twist that Perturabo would later wield the warhammer of his slain brother Primarch of the 10th Legion, Ferrus Manus, a Primarch who represented that creativity that Perturabo himself was denied expression of. Furthermore, that the hammer was made by Fulgrim, the embodiment of the arts and refined culture. Interestingly enough, unlike many of the other traitor Primarchs, Perturabo did not associate his legion with the powers of chaos, nor did he strive to become its champion. If anything, he viewed chaos as a tool, but much preferred the use of bionics rather than the fleshy chaos growths that came with the association with chaos. During the Siege of Terra, he was disgusted by what his fellow traitor legions had become and left the conflict, retreating into the Eye of Terror. Something that I forgot to mention earlier in this video was that it was Perturabo who titled the tear in space as the Eye of Terror. He actually named the Eye of Terror what it is. The Geneseed organ that I most associate with the 4th Primarch Project and the 4th Legion overall is the Catalepsean node. This Geneseed organ is implanted above the brainstem of an Astartes. When an Astartes is deprived of sleep for long periods of time, the Catalepsean node cuts in, activated by stress and fatigue hormones that the regular body produces in such conditions. This organ allows an Astartes to shut off parts of their brains while still remaining alert and active, allowing certain parts of the brain to quote-unquote rest or sleep. According to available information, the prolonged use of this organ had its risks in the form of inducing hallucinations and even psychosis. The reason why I associate this Geneseed organ with the 4th Legion and the Primarch Project are because there was no better time for the use of the Catalepsean node than during a long, drawn-out siege which the Legion and Primarch specialized in. Shutting off parts of their brain to remain alert in battle may have been a common practice for the Legion and may have been what led to the temperamental changes to the Legion as well. Repeatedly in their lore, the Iron Warriors are referred to as the Workhorse Legion, constantly fighting siege after siege, with little to no rest in between campaigns. If we combine this with the constant necessary use of the Catalepsean node, it could have flavored the particular kind of madness that the Legion experiences. Primarch Project number 4, designated Perturabo, and his Legion, the Iron Warriors, are a reflection of what so often happens with humanity when a spark of genius is recognized during a time of war. The suppression of its potential creativity toward more generative things, and the application of its ingenuity toward the aims of death and destruction. They are an illustration of the dreadful effects of constant shell-shocking, traumatizing, attrition actualizing warfare on the human psyche, in Astartes and Primarch form. As said before, they were made to be this way, and now the very thing that they were supposed to be fighting for, the Imperium of Man, they have turned against and are using their nature to tear down, like they did the Imperium's enemies at a time. And that was my dive into Primarch Project number 4, designated Perturabo, and the Legion under his command. Without anything else to be said, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.